Gurmagad Cion Gorla, Big Sinn Féin a taú leis an bille seo, Stoilm gur bille táchtach Tommy de glorg an bille seo feag Tamalín in Oireachtas, chun go méist in an stocha deire chur nó ar anima chur go thomláin leis an Convention Istanbul. I thank the Minister for bringing this forward. I think it's a welcome bill. It's long overdue. It's something that's been debated at Ministers' questions on a number of occasions over the last 2 or 3 years. It will enable Ireland to ratify the Istanbul Convention, which it's already signatory to, but not having ratified it. A total of 45 countries have signed the convention, but of those, 33 have ratified it, and of the 12 that have signed but not ratified it, Ireland is one. I think, in general, there is an effort, I believe anyway, at the very least, that to cooperate on a cross-party basis on issues relating to domestic violence and sexual violence. And it's an example I actually give in, some people think, don't you ever agree in here at all? The example I usually give is the domestic violence bill, and that actually only really got traction in the media after it became law. The debate in these houses, which was constructive, saw significant engagement, good bill to begin with, saw constructive engagement across the party basis in the Seanad, and saw a number of Seanad amendments taken on, to the extent that you have a good law. There's probably ways that can be improved, but it was a good law. Got no traction or anything really outside these houses. But as an example, I think this is an area that, on issues of these nature, I think that they're of great importance, and I think that that's right, and I think that that should be the way. I think we have to do everything we possibly can to protect women from all forms of violence, protect children from all forms of violence, protect everyone from all forms of violence, and prosecute and eliminate domestic violence and violence against women. Section 3, I suppose, is one of the most the core of the bill in many respects. So subsections 1 to 4 provide that it's an offence for any person to commit a relevant offence on board an Irish ship or an aircraft registered in the state, and it's an offence for an Irish citizen or resident to commit a relevant offence in a convention state. Those relevant offences being assault causing harm, assault causing serious harm, threats to kill or cause serious harm, coercion or harassment under the Non-Fatal Offence Against a Person Act 1987, sexual assault and aggravated sexual assault under the Criminal Law Rape Amendment Act 1990, rape and rape under Section 4 of the Criminal Law Rape Amendment Act 1990. So obviously this is providing full extraterritorial jurisdiction to these key offences, and as the Minister has identified, for Irish citizens, murder and manslaughter was already long covered by extraterritoriality. However, this brings it to the extent that somebody who is not a citizen but who is ordinarily resident in the state, where they commit murder or manslaughter outside of the state, then they can be convicted under this under the laws of this jurisdiction. The enabling of international cooperation in this bill is particularly welcome and necessary. We also need to have a more integrated approach between North and South, and I believe we should, as much as possible, work towards on an all-island basis on domestic and sexual violence, and I think that that's necessary to address the problem. Adopting good practices, both North and South, would allow us to tackle the problem in a very meaningful way. Like many other areas of legislation, unless of course we have the resources to back up the actions of ratifying this convention, we are going to continue to fail women, children and men who suffer domestic violence. And I think anyone would accept that clearly this convention is important, but ultimately it is not going to provide the protection that is needed to everyone who is at risk of domestic violence. The amount of people who suffer domestic violence, and I'll return to that, is still very, very significant. And I would encourage the Minister that the government look again at the resources available. There were many cuts in this area during the recession, and there are large parts of the country that do not have adequate services and do not have adequate resources. In our 2019 alternative budget, Sinn Féin committed to investing in services such as domestic violence housing support at a cost of 2.8 million and pledged to treble the funding for the Rape Crisis Network from 60,000 to 180,000 per annum. It's a 3 million investment in specific measures, allowing for the adequate services that people so desperately need and that consistently experience underfunding by this government. It does not take a lot to fund such services, and the great work they do gives back tenfold what they receive. They are vital if we are to be taken seriously in our efforts to make Ireland a safer place who experience and are victims of domestic abuse or domestic violence. And I suppose I did acknowledge previously the Domestic Violence Act in that regard. I would ask the Minister whether he has plans to put in place a review of the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act so that we can have a sense of how it is being implemented, in particular the area of training. And I know that Garda representative bodies were, I suppose, highlighting that as an issue that a lot of their members weren't entirely did not feel adequately trained, and I suppose in that regard felt ill-equipped to properly implement it. So I suppose if we could have a quick review of how that is going, I think it would be of value. I would also take the opportunity to commend the many individuals, NGOs and civil society groups such as the Irish Observatory on Violence Against Women, Women's Aid, the National Women's Council, Safe Ireland, the Rape Crisis Network, Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, and all those other groups who advocate and continue to advocate for better policies, resources and legislation to combat domestic and sexual violence in Ireland. They have all called consistently for the ratification of this legislation. For a number of years, I think it's fair to say, the Women's Aid Change the Conversation campaign has provided a stark and sobering reminder of how pervasive domestic violence and intimate partner violence is in Ireland. Just to, I suppose, outline the extent of that from a variety of reports in recent years, 1 in 5 women in Ireland have experienced emotional, physical, sexual or financial abuse by a current or former partner. 1 every 2 women murdered in Ireland are killed by a partner or ex-partner. In 2016, there were 16,946 disclosures of domestic violence against women during 19,000 contacts with Women Aid direct services. The Women's Aid 24-hour helpline responded to 15,952 calls in 2016. In a 2014 study entitled Violence Against Women, an EU-wide survey by the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency, it was reported that 14% of women in Ireland have experienced physical violence by a partner since age 15. So I think that gives an impression of how widespread and pervasive a problem this still is. Tá sé forleathan, tá sé dain mar faib, tá tionachraige méid mór mná agus páistí agus tá fiú tréis an píosareachtaíocht sé tá bóthar fada le taistealaigh. The Istanbul Convention is a Council of Europe convention against violence against women and domestic violence, which was opened for signature on the 11th of May 2011. The convention aims at the prevention of violence, victim protection and to end with the impunity of perpetrators, to quote, in convention states, and the full convention is contained in the schedule. It's the obligation of the state to fully address this issue in all its forms and to take measures to prevent violence against women, protect the victims of domestic violence and prosecute the perpetrators. The Convention leaves no doubt that there can be no real equality between women and men if women experience gender-based violence on a large scale and state agencies and institutions turn a blind eye, much like the Ireland of not so long ago. Implementing the Convention is an opportunity for us to bring about the systemic and the institutional change we need to facilitate the protection of women and the accountability of perpetrators. It is critical to match our responses to the scale and complexity of the problem of the violence. Once Ireland ratifies the Convention, we will begin to be examined for compliance with the standards, and for that reason we need to get our house in order. I would take this opportunity to welcome the announcement last year that the CSOs to undertake the collection of data on the prevalence of sexual violence in the form of the SAVI 2 report. It's been 16 years, far too long since the last SAVI conducted. Clearly, with poor data or outdated data, that has an impact on the development of policy. Data is very important to developing policy, so I think this should have been undertaken far sooner, and I hope that it is available as soon as possible. It's essential for forming an understanding of the problems that we are facing, the prevalence of sexual violence in our society, and to understand what actions or policies are needed to address this. So it's fundamental to combating this abuse will be the completion of the SAVI 2 report, providing updated research and data on sexual abuse and violence in Ireland. Deputy Loughlin referenced, I suppose, the need for judges to have the legislation in relation to this particular piece of legislation, in relation to domestic violence legislation. I would also highlight, I suppose, a point I've made frequently is inconsistent sentencing in relation to I suppose not all judges, but some judges in relation to sexual violence. I think that's something that can be addressed and needs to be addressed in the area sentencing guidelines, and I've been in regular contact with the department on that, and I hope that we will see progress on that soon. But I think it's vitally important for the confidence of the public in sentencing to have consistent and good sentencing, that we have those sentencing guidelines. To conclude, Bavada Marisha rá go takeíon míid leis an bileise tá sé socha bidig mé míid fécint lasathe gach seans nach méid lasathe an píosa reachtaíochta seo agus tá stochar mar tá I go leor te cé bhfuil an píosa reachtaíochta fada de bhar bhfuil an convinisiún ann tá sé siimplí go leor is leite freisin. Tá sé luachfar, tá sé táchtach agus tásúlagam gur féidirling chur I gcríoch go luath agus go mbeadh sé mar cuid de lína stáite seo.